Well, I have to start this off by saying I feel so seen after this episode, and I have to thank Torbin for that. Torbin, thank you for saying what I was saying at the beginning. I feel like Torbin is basically all of Reddit right now. He's just calling out everything that so many people online, myself included, have thought they saw, maybe saw. And I just want to say thanks. Night Sisters. Night Sisters. Hello everyone, we're going to be talking about the Acolyte Episode 7 Choice today. But before I jump into that, I just want to add, yes, I know that Torbin guessing that these are Night Sisters does not mean that they are Night Sisters. But it was more the fact that it's even suggested, which would imply that Torbin has a sense for what the Night Sisters are, and a lot of people were initially, well, I don't know, a lot of people. And some people initially were saying, when I suggested that it could be Night Sisters, that I knew nothing because I said Night Sisters. And I was like, look, it's a Force cult. It's witches. It could be some connection to Night Sisters. Night Sisters might not be the same as we know them to be in this time period because this is High Republic, so they could be different. I still do think this could be somewhat connected to the Night Sisters. I don't think these are specifically Night Sisters. And there's a few reasons for that actually through this episode that makes me feel a little bit of a connection, but also that distance. Like I was saying, maybe they're a separate sect. Maybe they have some ties to the Night Sisters, but they're their own thing. We'll talk about more of that throughout, but man, before we get into it, I gotta say spoilers, because this episode is full of them, as we finally are figuring out what really happened that fateful night. What really happened? Who was to blame? Were the Jedi brainwashing people? No, they weren't. So a lot of people were also really worried about the fact that the Jedi are going to be like the bad guys here, and I don't really think that that's what happened in this episode. Although I think there's a lot of things that happen in terms of how this plays out that are unfortunate. That come from people being quick to make judgments and not communicating properly with each other. Sounds familiar, honestly. In 2024, I can relate. I can relate to what's going on here. The episode starts off with, it's a flashback episode. So back into the flashback to Tank we go. And we start off with Sol and the team of Jedi. We have Torbin, we have Indara, we have Sol, and we have Kalnaka, who are on the planet where they end up running into the witches. They're surveying this planet, and there's a really cool reference to, I believe, something from High Republic. I've just started getting into some of the High Republic lore, and I've started off with the first book in the High Republic series, which is called The Light of the Jedi. Well, I'm listening to it as an audiobook, but it's basically talking about this crazy hyperspace disaster that happened that caused a bunch of wreckage. It was really bad. And it really introduces you to, as I said in my previous review, that idea of the High Republic being a time where nobody makes it, and how many fans of the High Republic were very excited when a whole squad of Jedi went out and almost all of them were just killed off. They were like, that's High Republic. And yeah, hyperspace. This event, very High Republic. So it was kind of cool to see that acknowledged. Now, I'm not sure if it's the same hyperspace event. Like I said, I'm just getting into the High Republic stuff, so pardon me, I'm still a bit of a High Republic noob. So my High Republic mega fans out there, please let me know in the comments if I am correct, but I think I'm correct in that that's what they're referring to, saying that this planet basically hasn't had life on it for a very long time, so they're here to see what's up and how it's doing, and it turns out, bada bing, bada boom, there's life. The life is greenery, and Indara is suggesting there could be more life on the planet because before, like she said, there was no life. So we'll see what happens. Torbin is not happy about this because he would like to go home. And while Sol is surveying, he finds other people on this planet. He finds Mae, and he finds Osha, and he kind of spies on them while they're doing their weird twin thing where they're like, you know, not the same, but one of the same, or whatever it is they say. What do they say? Always one, but born as two. That's the weird stuff they're saying in the wilderness. So they're saying always one, born as two, and Soul's like, this seems strange. And then he ends up kind of following them and seeing some of what's going on with this Force cult, and he gets worried about these girls. He thinks that they're in danger, and he thinks that they need to be rescued. And of course, they're Jedi, so that's what they should do. But also, it's established early on that Soul maybe is looking for someone to train and guide. I think he's a little jealous of the fact that Indara has Torbin as her Padawan. He wants a Padawan of his own. And Indara's like, look, man, I don't know if you're ready for a Padawan, because I let my Padawan make calls because I think that's a good way to learn things. I don't want to tell him what to do. I want him to learn himself. And he'll never do that if I'm always like just kind of strong-arming him. And you don't seem to get that, which is why I have a Padawan, and you do not, Soul. That's not a lesson that Soul seems ready to learn, though, because he's just really committed to this idea of saving these girls, and maybe one of them will be his Padawan. Indara is more cautious about this. When they find out that there's people on the planet, Indara is like, we should reach out to the Jedi Council and see what they think. And everyone's like, man, these are witches. They seem super suspicious. Maybe they're Night Sisters. Maybe we should do something about it because it seems odd, and like maybe they're evil. And Indara's like, well, wait, they could just be like a different group of people that have different customs in different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. And everyone else is like, no, like they seem super suspicious. I think we should be worried about this. Indara is hoping that people will be cautious. Everyone else is like, nah, let's just run in swinging. And this is also shown in the fact that when she goes to confront the witches to ask them about the kids that they have with them, she says, I think I should go in alone, because if we all go in, it might be like kind of tense, it might be kind of intimidating. And Soul is saying, well, there's like 50 women in this coven, and you know, there's the 2 girls, and so maybe you shouldn't go in by yourself. And initially, this is my one criticism I have of this episode. It's not very big. I mean, I have a few criticisms, but this is one of them. And it was just, Indara seems to switch so fast from being like, no, it is really best if I go alone, to, yeah, all right, maybe you make a point. Well, I'll go, but everyone like chill. Everyone just be chill. So they go in, and everyone is pretty chill. However, Torbin does get possessed. I thought that was interesting to see what he is seeing, and this idea of he basically chose to submit to the possession in a way. I will say there was a connection I felt a little bit to the Night Sisters here, just in that it felt like Mother Anastasia was trying to kind of seduce him. She's kind of using like what he wants to almost get him to pledge fealty so that he could be kind of like her puppet, which feels very Night Sistery. Like they have, you know, people that are bonded to them. But it's also interesting because this coven is just women, right? So that makes me think that if they were ever connected to the Night Sisters, perhaps they decided, like, we don't want this part of being a Night Sister, so we're just going to go do our own thing and just be a group of women, and then, you know, find our own way to carry on that legacy. I'm not sure, but it's just a theory. So take with that what you will. And just a vibe that I was getting. You can let me know what you were thinking of that, or if there's other witches from Star Wars, which I do know there's other groups of witches that you feel that they could be connected to. I'd love to hear about that. Fortunately, Torbin does get rescued, but there's also this theory online that Torbin actually was never really rescued, because once the witches get into your head, it kind of messes you up permanently for life. I think the fact that he also chose to kneel could be an indicator that there was still some influence that was being exerted over him, and that could have been why he wasn't able to let go of his concern for the witches, and he might have actually been goading things on with the hope of using that to get home. And so I think him revealing that made it an objective that Mother Anastasia gave him as something that he would get it, but at the cost of acting maybe irrationally to get what he wanted. I think it maybe messed up his head in some way and just made him either more aggressive or, made him behave towards that goal in a way that wasn't always the most considering what's actually best, as opposed to being just driven to this one thing. However, that being said, I don't think everyone can be given that benefit of the doubt, because Soul is very much, I feel, driven towards this one objective and propelled by it through the story in terms of what decisions he makes, and that being his main motivation. And he never had any witch in his mind, so he's just doing that himself. But like I said, he seems pretty convinced that these girls are in danger, they need to be rescued. He is already kind of interested in a Padawan, and he's like, we should test them. So they test them, and during Mae's test, Mae goes first, they just kind of let her do her thing, and then she basically asks to leave. And Indara asks her a few questions about the Ascension ceremony that they interrupted, and then they let her go. So Sol says, I think for this one, like, I have a method that I'd like to try, if that's cool. And Indara's like, okay, like, do your thing. And in that test with Osha, he instead convinces Osha to be honest, saying that if she really wants to be a Jedi, she has to be honest. And we know that Osha was conflicted about this decision, right? She definitely seemed to be interested in going with the Jedi, but I think she was feeling nervous because her family's telling her, you know, the Jedi, it's not safe to trust them. And on the other side, she's like, I do feel this pull. So she was conflicted. And Sol talking to her kind of makes her calm and makes her committed to wanting to be a Jedi. Without her actually resolving that conflict, I feel herself, which is where Indara takes a concern with Sol's approach. And I think that she does not like the fact that she feels Sol is trying to make Osha accept what he really wants, which is he wants Osha to become his Padawan. And she's saying, you know, don't project this on her because you don't necessarily know that that's what she exactly wants. She has a family, she's with these witches, and I don't know if we should get involved there. I like this conflict that we have between Indara and Sol in terms of how Indara seems to be more of the type of Jedi who wants to get the full picture, is very calm, very wise, and is not so quick to judge. But the younger Jedi that we have here, I'm assuming Sol is not as senior, quite as senior as Indara, because he doesn't have a Padawan yet. And of course we have Torbin, who is a Padawan, and they seem more quick to judge and more brash in terms of their tactics. Whereas Indara's wisdom is telling her, like, we need to take a step back. And they're saying, no, we need to rush in and act on our suspicions. I think it's just a really interesting conflict because I think it also plays into this idea of the downfall of the Jedi, and also how we see that built into the prequels. This idea that even with Anakin as this savior is kind of misinterpreted. Like, because Anakin was a miracle birth, has no father, Qui-Gon comes to the conclusion that Anakin must be the chosen one. He's super powerful with the Force. There's no explanation for how he was born. When in the end, we find out, no, that there actually was an explanation. It was using the Force, but it was all contrived by the dark side. So we misinterpreted that because Qui-Gon wanted to see what he wanted to see. He even convinces the council to take Anakin in and train him, even though the council is like, well, Anakin is also pretty old once again to be a Jedi. So same kind of vibes here that we see in the prequels, but I just feel like it's being explored in more layers in a more in-depth fashion, which is what I really like about it. It's playing with that idea, that concept, but cracking it open a little bit wider and also examining what is it that motivates people to make those choices, as opposed to just like what causes the downfall of the Jedi. It's more like, where does that come from with them personally, with these characters? How do we humanize that? And they found a pretty good way to do it, I think. Another thing that Torbin brings up is that he realizes that they're symbionts, these kids, I think I'm saying that right, they're symbionts, they're symbionts, are the same. Which he's like, even being twins, that's not normal. That should be different. And it's not, which means that it seems like it's one consciousness that was split. Also something that on Reddit we were theorizing about, that I was theorizing about. This, Torbin is just the theory guy. He's literally all of our theories made manifest in this episode. So he reveals that and says, well, this must be super suspicious, so now we really have to go address the witches. Goes to do that, even though Indara's like, don't do that. And it's basically this suspicion and this concern that creates this conflict. So he rushes in. The witches feel that these children are being threatened. Mother Coral eggs Mae on to use her anger and to prevent Osha from leaving. She confronts Osha, and there are a couple things. This is where things get a little bit different. So, like I said, a lot of the stuff feels the same. We're just seeing different sides of it. So unfortunately, that does mean a lot of that weird dialogue that we were like, that dialogue's really weird, is true. However, it does make sense in the context that a lot of what happens here is weird, which would of course make sense then from Soul's looking in and seeing that things feel strange and maybe he should get involved, because it's very different from what we're used to and how people would normally speak. So that is confirmed as being exact. However, not all of the dialogue is the same, because Mae, when she is confronting Osha and is trying to prevent her from leaving, does lock her in the room, but we never see her saying, like, if you can't leave, if you want to leave, like, I'll kill you. And she never makes that threat here. We also learned that she didn't actually intentionally make a fire. It was more that she took the fire lantern and she was looking at the fire in the book, and it got a little too close and it caught on fire from the lantern, and then she dropped it, and then an electrical fire started, and it was not intentional. It does not seem to be that way. Mae even goes to get help, but when she runs in to get help, that's when we already have this conflict with the Jedi, who end up scaling the wall, getting in, even though the doors are all locked. That's when things get really crazy, because now we have Mae there, which Soul mistakes Mae for Osha, who's running in and saying, help, help, help. It's not looking good, you know? If you're in Soul's shoes, you're like, this already seems suspicious. Now this girl is calling for help. And at that time, that's when Mother Anastasia decides to turn into, I don't know, a smoke being. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. So I don't really know what's going on with that. At the same time, it seems like Mae is about to turn into a smoke being as well. And Soul is like, oh, heck no, I'm not going to let this happen. Whatever's going on here is bad news. So he takes out his lightsaber, something he doesn't do that often, by the way. He's a really good lightsaber user, but he's more restrained with his use of it. So clearly he feels like who he interprets to be Osha, but is actually Mae, is in danger, and he stabs the smoke monster that is Mother Anastasia, and she reforms and she dies. And she reveals to him in her last moments that she was actually going to let Osha go with him, and that, you know, he made this really brash call, kind of bad call. She also, before she dies, does warn the Jedi about this idea of how their good intentions are going to be the thing that will be their downfall, because although they do mean well, it's almost like they mean well, but they're kind of like trying to force some things or determine what is really best without examining everything clearly, because they have this mindset of like, I know what's best at times, which can be dangerous even when you have the best of intentions, right? What a fair warning to make for the Jedi, to be honest with you. I also am not really sure why Anastasia and Mae both were doing that. I don't know if it's because the consciousness that Mae and Osha are from is Anastasia's, and it's like split off versions of her. I think that's what was happening here, but I like this episode because I feel like they don't give us 100% holding our hand every little bit. It's like there's all these pieces, and it's kind of laid out there for you, but there's still some stuff that's open to interpretation in terms of how we want to see that. At least that's what I saw. If there is stuff that I missed and you feel like it is very concrete and they established how it is, let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to discuss that with you. But that was my interpretation, so I don't know if it's because Anastasia and Mae are connected, that when Anastasia went smoke monster, Mae was going to also do that, or if something else was happening there, or if it has to do with the fact that Mae went through the Ascension, so maybe this is like an ability that you access through the Ascension. We don't really know, because we don't have all the information there, but I'm curious to hear what people's theories are. And then, of course, after all of that goes down, this leads into a fight against Mother Coral, who does end up poofing away. She's the only one that I think survives this, and she ends up influencing the Wookiee, Kalnaka, or the cult influences the Wookiee. Maybe she kind of calls to them. They possess him, and he starts to fight the rest of the Jedi group. It's during this fight that Indara is forced to kind of go into his mind and free him from the possession, but in doing that, she also seems to kill all of the rest of the Coven that were working together to take control of Kalnaka. So that is very much a thing that happens, and I feel like Indara is not happy with the fact that that was something she had to do. She seems pretty hesitant to want to actually hurt anyone, and I feel really bad that Indara dies so early in this, because she just seemed like such a cool and great and like wise character, such a cool Jedi master, and we barely got to know her. Unless she actually is secretly somehow still the Sith, behind everything. It's possible. She did seem really interested about that ascension ritual. That's all I'm going to say about that. And at the end of all of this, we get down to that moment with Mae and Osha on the platforms looking across at each other, slowly not running to jump to the other platform to get to each other, just talking to each other over these platforms. Meanwhile, little did they know, Soul also rushes in and sees both of them there and is using the Force to hold the platforms up as they're about to collapse. But he can't hold both of them. And Mae and Osha are the most frustrating children and will refuse to try to jump to the other platforms. They're both on one, and then Soul could have held that, so he has to let one go, and he ultimately decides, I'm gonna keep Osha, I'm gonna let Mae fall. Mae is definitely not into being a Jedi, but at least Osha is. She could be my Padawan. And that is the secret that I think he has been keeping from Osha all these years, and something that has haunted him, is that he feels that he just completely let Mae down there and let her die. Condemned her to her death. Of course, she didn't die. She's fine, ultimately. But it's interesting that I feel like maybe there's some stuff, I don't know, maybe there's stuff that Mae doesn't remember correctly here, or maybe it's just that she remembers the Jedi doing a bunch of bad stuff and that overrules other things. And why does Osha remember Mae saying that she would kill her when we don't see that here? Does that mean that that was implanted by someone, and who was that implanted by? I don't think it would have been Soul, but I don't know. It still feels like there's stuff that we're missing here. So I'm very excited to see what we get in episode 8. A big complaint that I have about this episode actually just comes from the credits, and that's the song at the end, which is so cringe. Guys, what is this song? It's clearly was written for the Acolyte, and I do love that it's an original song. I think that's really nice, but I just feel like it doesn't fit the vibe at all of anything. It's so poppy, and it just feels kind of weird. But I don't know. Like I said, I'm not familiar with High Republic, so maybe this is what people listen to in the High Republic, and maybe it's actually very fitting. Maybe High Republic was a big pop era in Star Wars. Across the galaxy, everyone was listening to pop. In fact, everyone was listening to this one song. That's the only song they had. Just this one song, talking about the power of two. The power of two. The power of two will haunt me for the rest of my days, and every time someone says it in Star Wars, I will think of the Acolyte. But I digress. Overall, I really liked this episode. I think it's expanding on some really cool themes that we've already seen in Star Wars, but just pulling them apart in interesting ways to get into these little tiny parts of what these conflicts are, and it feels complex. And I love that the truth of this story of what happened here wasn't just the Jedi making this brash call to take out the witches. It's actually more complicated than that. It's more that they couldn't really quite agree how best to deal with the witches, and their own paranoia and their own stuff that was going on for them that got in the way of them maybe seeing things clearly and being able to come to a peaceful resolution. And at the same time, it's also about the witches' preconceptions of what the Jedi are and how they're not really as good as they seem. Honestly, a little fair, but at the same time, the witches definitely were afraid of the Jedi and didn't want them to be there. So neither of these people is willing to see the other people for what they really are, which isn't necessarily good or bad, just people. What a great message for where we're at right now in the world, I just feel like it's very fascinating, it's very interesting, and it's also interesting how polarizing this show has been, which feels like the themes that it's speaking about here, it's fascinating. It just feels like it's reflecting out, echoing out tenfold almost in a way. So yeah, very compelling watch. I actually wanted to do some other stuff while I was watching this episode, and I could not divide my focus at all. I was completely compelled to watch. I was enthralled, and I really enjoyed it. Overall, I would give it an 8 out of 10, and I'm excited to see how we conclude and what other little answers we might get and what questions we'll be left to reflect on at the end of this season. Which is also interesting because initially this show was going to be 3 seasons, and the story that we're getting in this one season was going to be way more drawn out. But it all ended up getting compressed because the head of the show really loved the actors so much that she just wanted more of them in the show. And so she decided, and also had the faith in their abilities, to compress the story. So I'm interested to see if there will even be an Acolyte season 2. I thought it was just going to be 1 season and a miniseries, but it's cool that the original pitch was to do 3, and I'm just wondering, yeah, where will we go with that? Anyways, that's it for me. I've already talked for far too long. Thank you so much for watching this review, and until next time, friends, stay nerdy.